Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to come speak today. Thank you, Trista, for catching me. She had to jump into my office to kind of get me in one place, which is kind of how it's been lately with, SB 326 and Proposition 1, coming to the ballot. And it's just kind of been very busy in our side of the house. So I'm Dr. Christina Rajlal. I am the Mental Health Services Act Coordinator for San Luis Obispo County. I filled the really big shoes of Frank Warren. So if you're familiar with Frank Warren, he was the previous Mental Health Services Act Coordinator, and he was promoted to Deputy Director. He is a good pal of mine prior to coming to the county. So I'm new to SLO County. I came here in about January, but before that, I actually was, I hopped over the county line and I was the Mental Health Services Act Coordinator for Kern County. So I'm very well versed in the Mental Health Services Act, very well positioned to tackle Proposition 1 as it comes forward, and how we're going to align with what Proposition 1 states. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on who I am and experience and all that jazz. So I was asked to come here and talk about the impacts of Proposition 1 on our mental health plan and system of care. And so just to give you a quick review, the Mental Health Services Act is also known as Proposition 63. And so it came into the ballot in 2004. It was passed by the voters and it was enacted in 2005. What that is a millionaires, they call it the millionaires tax. So 1% of tax on the income of millionaires within the state of California. That money all gets kind of grouped up into the state of California, the capital of California, Sacramento, and then it gets divvied down to each county depending on population size and density and some factors like that. So fun fact here, approximately 76,000 tax returns reflected taxable income in excess of $1 million when they tracked it back in 2017. So a lot of time has passed since then. The county also receives the funding that they get from the state 2 years in arrears, meaning it takes 2 years before that money is collected and then comes back down to the county. So that's an important rule. There's always like this 2-year rule with the Mental Health Services Act. The funding is divvied down as it comes down to the county. It's divvied down into 5 pots per each county. Those components are CSS, which is Community Services and Supports. That houses some of our highest utilized programs. It's the largest amount of funding that we get for the Mental Health Services Act. That funds for things like full service partnership, our highest acuity, those individuals that have the highest acuity or severity of symptoms. Full service partnership is covered under that CSS category. Also, our peer services, our wellness centers, those are funded under CSS, under general system development. Then you have another pot called prevention and early intervention. That's all of our preventative programs, a lot of our programs in school. There is a mandate that 51% of those dollars have to be spent towards our youth services. Then there's innovation. That's where we're able to look at really innovative practices that have never been done in the county before. Maybe those have been done in Italy. And we're like, okay, that concept might work with our population here. So we want to take that and try it. That would be funded under innovation. Then we have another funding category called workforce education and training. That really helps with some of our culturally focused programming, some of our education and training to make sure our workforce is fully competent and capable to provide care to our constituents within our county. And then we have another bucket called CFTN, which is capital, facilities, and technological needs. That's for any technology we may need, upgrades we need within our system, our electronic health record. If we needed to repair buildings or buy a new building, we could use that funding as well. So the Mental Health Services Act covers a lot of different things. When it was created, it was really created to kind of fill a gap that exists within the system. And that was traditionally all of the majority of the services that we provided were funded through Medi-Cal, which means we provide the service and then we get reimbursed for the service. But we know for a good practice of care, there's a lot of work that needs to be done that's not billable. Like a lot of that is preventative work, right? So we don't want people entering into our system when they're in crisis, the highest level of care, the worst day of their life. We want to get to them early and give them the tools so they could be successful. And if they experience mental health challenges or crises, that they're already becoming equipped and proactive in how to deal with these feelings and these thoughts, and then seek care. So really trying to look at a preventative lens. That's what the Mental Health Services Act was initially intended for. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the next slide. This slide is dollars and cents. This just kind of shows you like our fiscal reporting. So we have fiscal year, let me use my mouse here so it's easier to read. Fiscal year 22-23. You can see like the state allocation that we got in San Luis Obispo County was about 11.9 million. Other revenue may be other sources of funding, Medi-Cal, and then our bottom line for our programs would be about 18.4 million that we're bringing in, with a total expense of this is how much we expend in the programs for that given year. You look at the next year and you'll see what's really important is to look at this line item, the MHSA state allocation. It's 11.9 million. Then the next year, 23-24, we're jumping to 31.1 million. Then 24-25, 20.7 million. And then 25-26, 20.4. So what's important to see is why is it jumping like this, right? It's like, how do you go from 11.9 million to 31.1 million? And how do you create that sustainability? Well, that's one of the interesting things about the Mental Health Services Act is because it's dependent on the millionaires in the state of California, we know that our businesses and our millionaires, they might leave, they may come and they go. And when that happens, it creates this volatile sense of funding. And it makes it really tricky to have consistent programming. So that's one of the challenges with the Mental Health Services Act. So now we're going to kind of shift our thinking from the Mental Health Services Act to what now is going to be called from MHSA to BHSA. That is the Behavioral Health Services Act. Under Proposition 1, it will be renamed to the BHSA. The reason why the governor wanted to rename it is because he wanted to be more inclusive of co-occurring and substance use disorder. So Behavioral Health Services Act is then inclusive of substance use treatment and substance use disorder. And so that's why it's being renamed. So you can see here, there's three main focuses that the governor has been talking about. And the first one here is reforming the Mental Health Services Act into the BHSA. This is to expand services to include treatment of all substance use disorders. Previously under the Mental Health Services Act, substance use disorder was kind of written out. It was recently in the last 2 years or so added in as co-occurring, and now it's being opened up to, just substance use, co-occurring, anything within that realm of behavioral health will be included. The next item here is the governor wanted to focus on outcomes, accountability, and equity. So his thinking is that a county integrated plan for behavioral health services and outcomes, including local behavioral health funding and services, will be inclusive of a maybe statewide or standard tracking of outcome measurements and success. So we'll see how that's being built in the legislation. In the language right now in the bill. It's not really clear the format in which the outcome measurements will be tracked. So we'll be interested to see as this rolls out in the next 2 years, how that will be streamlined from the governor's perspective. The third item here is the focus on housing and behavioral health treatment in unlocked community-based settings. So there's a huge focus here on housing. There's a focus on housing under SB 326, but there's also a follow-along assembly bill called AB 531. And that is a bond measure to help build 10,000 new clinic beds in homes statewide. There is a focus here on housing for the veteran population with behavioral health challenges and substance use disorder. So we'll see how that rolls out. I say we'll see how that rolls out because the language in the legislation, the way in which it's written, is very dense and it's very cumbersome to read. And so there's still a lot of things that are not well defined as to how we will implement them going forward. So what typically happens is once it's passed and signed off on, more things will come down from the state called information notices, and those will come directly to us at the county, and it will help define how some of these pieces will work. So we don't have full definition of everything yet. We just kind of have a sense of direction. So remember I talked about those 5 funding buckets. It was like, it's kind of like naming the 7 doors. CSS, PEI, innovation, WET, and CFTN, right? Those are the 5 buckets of funding. So this now transfers those 5 buckets into 3 buckets. And if you look at that, the general pot of money that we get each year, 30% of that will go towards housing. 50% of it is inclusive of housing, supports, and services, and no more than 25% can be used towards capital development, meaning if we got a certain allocation, we can only use 25% of that to build a new facility for that given year. So there are some parameters that they're giving for each of these funding categories. The next funding category here is full service partnership. That's to comprise of 35% of the funding that we receive in a given year. So like I mentioned earlier, community services and supports, that 1 bucket of funds that gives us full service partnership, that's now going to be extracted from that community services and supports, and it's going to be its own standalone category. Then the last category here, the third, is behavioral health, community services, and supports, which will comprise another 35%, which is the remainder of the fund balance that's available. 51% of that must be spent on early intervention. So 51% of the 35%. These are a lot of numbers. It's a lot of math. But I think the takeaways here are that what we knew as prevention and early intervention and general system development, those categories are in retrospect going away. They're no longer categories. So those programs that are in those 2 buckets of funding now will have to compete for the dollars under this new 3rd category. And that's what's a little bit tricky for us as a county, is we're really trying to stretch our brain and be very creative of, if those go away, how do we retain as many services as possible? There are other avenues we're looking at, other funding streams, grant opportunities. There's something new coming down, called BH Connect, and we're looking at those to see what else can we leverage to keep programs, even if they don't stay in the MHSA or BHSA, and they move to an off-ramp to another funding stream. So my next slide here is really going to be a lot of dollars and cents talk. So if we had, this is an example, if we had $16.3 million in a given year, we know that off the top, before it even comes to the county, 5% gets taken off the top. 3% will go towards statewide workforce development programs and workforce initiatives. That'll happen at the state level. It'll probably incentivize workforce development programs. We have a workforce shortage within the behavioral health system all throughout the nation, really in all of medical services. And so this is supposed to be to incentivize getting new workforce and that we can develop and help to grow into the positions we need. This 2% here will be taken off the top. So when we lost prevention and early intervention, they took 2% of the total and they said, well, we're going to give that to public health and they can do population-based prevention programs. So this won't be individual like PEI type of programs. It will be broad, of like outreach and engagement with certain populations. And that's one of the pieces they added in there to help with that offset of prevention. So if you have that 16.3 million and you take this 5% away, you're left with 15.5 million that we have for a given year, right? This is as an example. So if you take 30% of that, that equates to about 4.6 million. If we look at what we're currently doing now, our housing, there's a lot for us to grow in this area, okay? The next category I want to show you is full service partnership. So 35% of this amount, this 15.5 million, equates to about 5.4 million. Our current budget as it stands in full service partnership is 7.9 million, meaning there's not enough funding to continue full service partnership the way we're doing it. That would be a deficit or a loss of 2.5 million we would have to find somewhere else. Moving down to this next category, which I told you was the tricky category, the BHSS or Behavioral Health Community Services and Supports. This is that category that programs are going to have to compete for those dollars. So 35% of that category, 35% is given by the state, equates to 5.4 million, right? So 35% of this 15 million is 5.4 million. Well, our current budget right now is at 18.7 million in this category. Yeah. So Trista's like shaking her head like, ouch. Okay. So you can see this right here. This is the big ouch, which is we don't have enough to continue all of our services. If this is the given example, there's 13.3 million in a deficit. We don't have 13.3 million to continue services as they stand. So there's a lot of stretching, like thinking outside the box right now with, it's not just SLO behavioral health, it's throughout the state. All of the MHSA coordinators are on the same predicament of, we're going to have to really stretch and understand everything coming down from the state to figure out how we backfill areas that we are predicting we will lose, right? And if that be off-ramping from BHSA into another area, and I'm giving my programming over to another counterpart in the county because that's in their wheelhouse and it's no longer an MHSA, we're planning on doing some of those shifts and moves. To give you a little bit of a better understanding of Prop 1, I wanted to bring this lens up. So okay, today's Friday, so not Thursday, yesterday, but previous Thursday, the Associated Press, so AP, called the election, meaning they said, okay, we now have done our statistical analysis and we're saying, yes, Prop 1 is projected to win. This is how close the vote has been. So 50.2% is a yes and 49.8% is a no. I have been monitoring, my team has been monitoring closely as we thought like the vote, we didn't think it was going to be this close and we didn't know it was going to take this long to call. There was a point in time, I can't remember what day it was, but there was a difference between like 1,900 votes. That's how close it was. It's always swung in the direction of a yes, and it never quite made it to a no, but it did make it to a 50-50 when it was at that 1,900 difference. These counties here in blue, all of these counties here in blue, and you see LA here too, these counties are all of the counties that voted yes, and all of the orange are all the counties that voted no, like the population, right? The population density. And so this is just really a testament to show you how close it's been. If you've been reading the media or watching the news, you will see that there's been a lot of conversation about why is it this close. It's been a long time since we've had something on the ballot that has been this close. And, you know, there's a lot of big feelings and thoughts as to why this is. There are so many people that have benefited from the way the MHSA is currently written. I've been up at the hearings. I was up at the hearings at the assembly last August, listening to the testimony of stories from individuals in their bright lime green shirts saying, save the MHSA, getting up and testifying, talking about how if it wasn't for the Mental Health Services Act, they wouldn't be here. And I think that that was very, very moving. And I was hoping that that would have a lot of weight. And I think when it came to the ballot, that's what we see, is we see that there's a hesitancy. People know that we're taking away from like youth services, where youth services are very needed because our kids have been very impacted during the pandemic and social isolation. It's increased self-harm rates across the nation. It's increased suicide rates. It's increased suicide attempt rates for our youth. And we're taking dollars away from our youth and we're filling it in places for beds. And a lot of people have a lot of big feelings about that. So there's a lot of debate as to the BHSA and will it solve the homeless crisis and the opioid epidemic, or will it just shift funding from another area, creating an issue somewhere else and fill a gap here. There's one thing to remember is with the change in Prop 1, there's no additional monies that are given, right? So we are not receiving extra money to do that housing. We're actually pulling it away from something that's working, a lot of things that are working well, and we're filling a gap where there's a need somewhere else. And so this is going to be really tricky for us to navigate and figure out how to work around this. So my next slide here just talks about what our next steps are with Prop 1 in the county. So the first step is we're going to be doing a huge deep dive into the next couple months on BHSA transition planning, what programs are safe, what programs maybe need to tweak a little bit and shift their goals or their population or things to meet requirements that are now listed in the legislative language. And then we'll look at programs that no longer meet the criteria within the BHSA or programs that have an off-ramp to another funding stream that we've identified. So this will be a very creative time for us to really look at what we can do and how far we can stretch to save what we have and also grow in the areas, because we do know that with our unhoused population and those with substance use disorder, the need is there. We know it. We see it on our streets anywhere you go in the state of California. And we're willing to look at that under another creative lens. We do a ton of work there with those that are unhoused and experiencing houselessness. But we can continue to stretch and learn through this process of where we can do better. And so, you know, there's some other language that came through when the governor made the big announcement last year that he was going to have Prop 1 on the ballot. At that time, it was called SB 326. And there are some things that did not need to go to the voters to change. And so those things we'll be working on changing in the next 2 years, according to the timeline that's given. Some of those are like updating language, updating authority given by the MHSA, which is kind of our watchdog at the state from Sacramento, addition to substance use disorder reporting. And then we'll continue to really reflect on the lessons we've learned in this last year as we've been shifting and trying to answer questions to the state of all of the good work that we do know is valuable in helping people in the community that will be displaced with this new proposition hitting the floor here. The other two things that I kind of want to bring up that will have some impact in our county as well is if you read our county information, you will know that the county is also in a fiscal deficit, which doesn't make the situation better. And so we're looking at other ways in which we can tighten our purse strings and save money and look at more efficient ways to do things as cost-saving measures. And so you may see or hear or feel that coming from the county. And we also have to re-RFP everything we're doing because that hasn't been done in quite some time. And we want to be in compliance and meeting the standards of our county. And so that's basically it for my slideshow. It was a mouthful. It was a lot. I don't expect everybody to remember everything, but if there's any questions, I would love to try to entertain those and answer them the best I can.